Did you have a summer job as a teenager, maybe working for a month or two at I don't know, a shopping mall or a car wash, or perhaps as I did back in the 1970s in a pie-themed restaurant? Well, listen, we're going to talk more about that in a minute. I'm Teresa Norton. I'm welcoming you back to The View from Abroad Season 2. This is the podcast where we take a look back over 3 decades, 30 years, to see how the world has changed by unpacking one of the newspaper columns I wrote back in the 1990s. And my guest today is a dear friend of mine and somebody I met in Hong Kong when he was the head of food and beverage at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel back in the 1990s, Dean Winter. Later, when I was doing theater-based communications training and coaching, Dean brought me back in to work with his leadership team at Swire Hotels. And that was when they were launching their very first hotel, the Opposite House in Beijing. But we're going to hear more about all of that, and we'll talk to Dean in a minute. First, let's listen to that column that Dean chose. Caught up in the rat race. I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, but as I make my way up Highway 101 north through California, I find myself heading down memory lane, across nostalgic terrain unvisited for decades. The lyrics to that 1950s song about having to get a summer job and suffer the summertime blues sprang to mind as we left the car wash and passed the site that once was home of my very first summer job. Within those berry-colored walls were a bevy of waitresses in hot pink puff-sleeved mini-dresses, a handful of tattooed busboys in white berry-stained aprons, dubious ex-convict types, short-order cooks, and the manager. I don't think any of us was over the age of 18. I only stayed long enough to acquire the U.S. $200 I needed to take my summer holiday along with 15 pounds, not British sterling, acquired by relentlessly choosing hot pecan pie a la mode as my free employee meal. I was paid minimum wage to say, "How many people in your party?" and "Right this way," as I led customers to their purple and pink upholstered banquette and handed them a pink and purple laminated menu. But I remember being asked on one occasion to do something above and beyond the call of pie hostess duty. Rats had been reported in the restaurant, much to the glee of the busboys and short-order cooks who enjoyed watching the mini-skirted waitresses shimmy and squeal at the mere mention of the infestation. We were not to alarm the public, as at that point these were only rumors, but we were all stepping gingerly around the banquettes to be sure. As I made my way towards the front entrance and pie-hungry patrons, I was stopped by a woman who pointed at her chocolate cream pie and asked, "What is this?" In truth, it appeared to be a rat turd, but being a truly professional 16-year-old pie hostess, I answered, "I don't know. Where's your waitress?" "This is a rat dropping. I don't want my waitress," she hissed. "I want you to show this to the manager." I headed back through the kitchen to his office where the manager was judiciously working his way through the same issue of Mad magazine he'd been reading for the past 6 weeks. Excuse me, sir, could you take a look at this pie? There's a lady at table 47 who says it has a rat turd on it." He eyed the pie, considered his options, and said, "It's a chocolate sprinkle." "But, sir," I protested. "Tell her it's a chocolate sprinkle," he repeated, returning to his magazine. I made my way back through the pink and purple world, and it was clear from the way that the waitresses were anxiously eyeing the floor and darting from table to table that the word had been spread among the staff. The rat was out of the bag, so to speak. Could I actually walk back to that woman and say, "I've asked the manager and he assures me that this, madam, is a chocolate sprinkle"? Or would I take that purple and pink bandana from around my neck, throw it down like the proverbial gauntlet, and leave that rat-infested pie hell behind me? A moral dilemma, to be sure. "I've asked the manager and he assures me that this, madam, is a chocolate sprinkle," I said in my most professional minimum wage, "I'm only going to be doing this stinking job for another week and then I'm out of here" voice. I honestly can't remember if she ate the pie, but the next day during my meal break, one of the waitresses gasped and told me not to look up from my hot pecan pie a la mode. I, of course, immediately stared up at the bulletin board above the table where he hung by his tail. The busboys sniggered. I had another week to go on this summer job. So I swallowed hard and headed back into the rat race, humming, "Sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, 'cause there ain't no cure for the summertime blues." Welcome, Dean Winter. Did you have a summer job when you were a teenager?
I did. I had quite a few actually. We lived in the countryside in the UK. I grew up in near a farm, and I'd help out on the farm. And then there was this thing called Bob a Job Week, which was a kind of Boy Scout thing. And a bob is a kind of slang for a five pence in the UK. If you've got a
Oh,
bob, like a dime or a quarter, that kind of slang. And Bob a Job Week was when the Boy Scouts would go around and kind of, ask for a bob for a job. So you'd go and wash someone's car, or you'd cut their grass, or whatever. And so I kind of really enjoyed that. And then it kind of just every summer I try and keep busy and ask my parents if they'd pay me to, do the garden, or, help my mother in the
did
kitchen
they?
with the dishes. Or they wanted me to do the job but not pay me. So I guess it was pocket money or something like that. And then yes, and then I guess I wanted to get into restaurants. My thing was to be a chef. I loved cooking, and I wanted to get as much experience of kitchens. So I washed dishes, I washed pots in Indian restaurants, in Chinese restaurants, in bakeries, you name it. I did everything. I just loved being around food
In the
and
kitchen.
yeah,
Well,
in the kitchen.
I'm just thinking, I had my kids were made in Hong Kong, and so they
Yeah.
went through their secondary school years, their high school years there, and there were not so many opportunities for a part-time job for a teenager in Hong Kong. You have girls, did they get a chance to do that? Did they go away to boarding school and maybe have a chance
Yeah,
to do
my
some?
elder daughter went to boarding school, and then between getting her, I guess, her A levels or whatever the IB, those high school was over, she worked the summer at a restaurant in Hong Kong that I'm involved in, and she absolutely loved it, and just that kind of notion of being in a team for the first time and understanding what it means to rely on other people, and she speaks Chinese, so the banter with the chefs was hilarious, so she loved it. She had a great time, and I think it really does shape you in those formative years, when you're thrown into a restaurant environment. It's great.
I mentioned the sort of like the microbe tribes within that little restaurant. There were I wasn't one of the waitresses. We don't call them waitresses anymore. What do we call them? Wait staff?
So,
Servers? That's suitably generic and boring. But anyway, right? So anyway, as the hostess, probably don't say that anymore. What are you? The
no,
receptionist? What are you called?
receptionist, receptionist,
Reception.
yeah.
As the receptionist at this exquisite pie shop and restaurant, um, I wasn't really part of the wait staff, so I was sort of an outlier. But then there were the guys that worked to bust the tables and the guys that were the short order cooks. What's that whole tribe thing like?
Yeah. It's fascinating, and it's different in different countries. So in the UK, it's very the us and them. The front of house and the back of house is very tribal.
Mm.
Bit of us and them, bit of friction, bit of rub. Um, my experience of Hong Kong is quite different. They sort of see themselves as one team. I guess the guys in the back want to make sure that they don't let the guys in the front down. I think that's whereas in my
Ah,
experience in the UK, it's like, well, I never see the customer. I don't even know what they look like, so why should I care? So I
right.
think the tribal element probably is very strong there. Bar guys have become quite sort of they've become the rock stars. The mixologists have become these kinds of you know uh, tattoos and top knots and kind of very it's all about them. So and then baristas of course that's another tribe altogether. So it's quite funny to sort of observe all these, and I love it because it obviously appeals to a certain younger generation, and if that's what brings them into the industry, then happy days.
Well, you must have watched that successful television series, The Bear?
Yes, I did. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah. And it's the
gosh,
way it's
this
filmed as well. The way it's filmed, it's very kind of documentary sort of style. And actually, I think parts of The Bear are very accurate. But I think because of the personalities they have on that, it comes across as very, it's about the art form of food and
mm,
how serious, the plating of a fish dish can be done and so on. So in my day, it was, bit different. I was a chef in the kitchen before it became sexy to be a chef.
right.
It was really not sexy being a chef when I was training.
Well, clearly, when I wrote that column, it wasn't very sexy backstage either, because although listen, I know there was poetic license when I was writing those columns and
Yeah,
adding things that were heightened the humor or the excitement of the situation. But I'll tell you what, although in a way, I kind of can't believe that I would have walked back to that woman with that slice of pie and told her, my manager says it's a chocolate sprinkle. But I guess I did. That thing of sort of deferring to the
yeah,
boss,
yeah,
right? Um,
yeah.
but I'll tell you one thing that was absolutely not a figment of my imagination, and that was the plating up of that rat on the bulletin board. Can you imagine? Nowadays, does that happen?
No,
Can you tell me
no,
the truth?
no. I can say that. I mean, mind you, I'm talking from my own personal experience. I'm sure
Right.
there are places in parts of the world that you don't want to go to where it does happen, but certainly in my experience, I mean, I think one of the great things about the industry is it's become extremely professional, and all of the government sort of authorities that introduce these various sort of health leagues and categorizations and so on. It really does make sure that operators are sensible and do the right thing. And if you are responsible for getting somebody sick, it is it's very very serious. And in some countries you can go to jail. So I think that's kept operators on their game.
The other thing I was thinking about was deferring to the boss, the sort of more militaristic structure of
Mm.
of hotels. I mean, I've worked with enough hotels to know that depending on the culture of the hotel or the restaurant, whether or not there is that, sort of top down mentality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think in Hong Kong as well, that's probably more pronounced actually. There is that sort of respect for the hierarchy. And when you're a supervisor or an assistant manager in a restaurant, for example, you wear a dark jacket, a black jacket. Um, in the Mandarin, for example, using that as a reference, you have the guys that are wearing the white jackets, and then you have the managers or supervisors wearing the black jackets, and they were known as the Black Jacket. So you would come in, and I had to pick up this kind of vocabulary when I started. And you'd come on duty, and you'd go into the restaurant, and you'd say, um, "Who's the Black Jacket today?" So
Is that
if you wanted to find out who was the guy in charge, right? So the Black Jacket sort of vernacular was definitely a thing. It probably still is in Hong Kong. And then yes, you've got the sort of the the restaurant chief that you rarely saw. He was like this Mr. or she was like the maitre d'. It was kind of they'd be there at the door when it's calm and easy, but then when they got busy, they'd disappear. They'd be in the office coincidentally filing something, and they would
so
remove themselves from the busy operation.
their role was more, were they sort of the guest interaction? Were they the is was their purpose
Yes,
welcoming people?
yes,
Was that me?
recognition.
Was that who I was? Was I the maitre d'?
I wouldn't have called you maitre d' in that scenario. Um, so, but no, it was about the recognition. The maitre d' is the one who recognizes people as they're coming out of the elevator and approaching the
Right.
restaurant and touching every table. And often quite sort of colourful and flamboyant, maybe overdressed a little bit. That kind of extrovert nature is what maitre d's tend to be. But great
Perhaps
people.
I missed my calling, Dean.
You maybe did. I told you that a long time ago.
Maybe I missed my calling. Well, so
Yeah.
I remember talking to somebody. It might have been you. It might have been you and Peter Lowe when we were all working together on that event. In any case, somebody told me that, when Forbes magazine would say, "What is your favorite restaurant?" Invariably, the answer may be different depending on which, fabulously well to do and successful executive they asked. But the reason was almost consistently the same. The reason it's why is that your favorite restaurant? Because they know me.
Oh, 100%. We've been talking about this a lot just recently about recognition and about how places make you feel. You know,
Mm,
it's not so much about the transaction of checking into a hotel, checking out of a hotel, or being shown to your table and being given the bill and plates coming and all of those kinds of motions. It's about how does it make you feel? And the biggest part of that, and I'm not talking about air conditioning. I'm talking
yeah,
about how did the team make you feel when you arrive and during the meal and when you
yeah,
leave and so on. And it's that emotional connection. And as human beings, I think that's what we all crave more than anything.
yes. I found that over the years in working with, coaching leaders and talking to their teams, and it seems to be kind of a universal human quality that we want to feel able to care for others, and we want to feel cared for and about. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think then to that point, what defines a great restaurant from a good restaurant is is the measured manner in which those attempts are made. If you fuss too much, it's not comfortable, and it you don't leave thinking, wow, that was great. You leave thinking, well, it was good, but they were a little bit annoying. And,
Yes.
and equally, if they don't fuss enough, you think, well, they didn't really show me the love. I'm not really sure I'll go back. So
Ex-
it's the art of knowing, reading a
right.
table. And not every guest is the same. Some people want lots of love, some people want no love.
Yeah.
And what we talk to our staff about is about, reading people, read the table. If it's two young people that are there on a date, leave them alone. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's a
Yeah.
lady by herself, she wants to read a newspaper, leave her alone.
This idea of engagement versus service and the balance between them. It's not really versus, but let's say they're on opposite sides of a teeter-totter, right? And when I first started working with people in the hotel business, I started noticing more about it when I was in different countries. And in the US, high on engagement, not so high on service. This is from somebody who lived most of their life in Hong Kong, from the States, but then lived 40 years in Hong Kong. I would go back to the States and I go, they want to introduce you to the pepper grinder. Hello, my name is Bob, and this is your pepper grinder, Sarah, and this is the salt shaker. It's all of this engagement. But then, could be left at your table thinking, can somebody get over here? Where the opposite I found was true in Hong Kong, and that's often what I was brought in to help with, is to up the engagement because the service was almost certainly at the Mandarin Oriental, it was like it was invisible. It was like things would appear and you weren't even conscious where it came from. And that was part of that je ne sais quoi of the Mandarin Grill,
Mm,
right?
mm. Completely agree. And I think in my experience, it's very similar in the US, where it is all about what their understanding of services might not be what the customer's understanding of services. And there is and the whole tipping culture around that as well, because if they think they've gone to the table and asked, is everything okay? They're leaving the table before they've heard the answer to the question. So, but they said, well, I asked, but now you're not giving me a tip. So, you had your chance to complain. Why didn't you? So it's almost like it's part of the kind of tipping mechanism which is, I just think it's
Oh, I know.
totally.
It's a horrible, I mean, God bless America for its export of entertainment. But for gosh sakes, this tipping thing is, and people who live in countries where tipping is not part of the culture, and that's
Right.
because, the wait staff are paid a salary they can live on. I suppose that is the justification for necessary tipping in the States, is that people are not paid enough to live on.
Yeah.
Whose fault is that? I mean, I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
a customer, right? but but I think it is greatly resented by local people who never had to do tipping before. When Americans start moving into a country and introducing this, it gets to be the
Right.
norm. I think it's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
Listen, it's time for us to take a break. And when we get back, I want to hear a true story from your own experience, somehow stimulated by that column. Okay, Dean, I have taken a look at the Deborah website, and it is extremely powerful. What brought this charity to your attention?
Yeah, it's really quite moving actually. I when I was a child, I suffered from eczema, and my kids have also had it thanks to me. So I've very always been very conscious about skin issues, and it is the largest organ you have. And I am a football fan, and I was at a dinner that was where the speaker was a gentleman called Graham Souness, who's a kind of bit of a legend football player in the UK, a Scottish national, played for Scotland, did very well in a club career. And he's this sort of patron of Deborah, which is this charity in the UK. And he told some stories about the individuals that are suffering with this condition, and it is utterly uh, uh, it's terrible, and there's no cure. It's a epidermosis bullosa, which is a butterfly skin, it's known as, and it's basically a thinning of the skin to the extent that you can hardly be touched without the skin breaking, and then you get infections, and people that have it have to be bandaged, and it affects all ages. But it's when you see younger children. In fact,
Mm,
life expectancy isn't very long, to be honest. So it's children that are affected. It's inherited. It's a condition you're born with,
mm.
and there's no cure, and there's a lot of research being done and so on. So I was really moved by it. Not, I mean, you can't compare this to eczema. Eczema's bad, but
Yes, yeah, but you had a consciousness of this. I looked at this website, and the first picture is it's breathtaking
yeah,
um in a real emotional and painful sort of way, to see this newborn baby with all of this inflamed skin. So,
yeah. So that's one part of it. When you see them as teenagers, and these girls that go to school, and I mean, it's another level of severity. And what moved me, Teresa, about it the most was that this football player, Graham Souness, was in his day was a real kind of hard nut. I mean, he was a brutal midfielder, very physical. As a manager, he was an autocrat. He was a really, man of steel kind of thing. We win, we don't do anything else. Real hard guy. And he was visibly moved at this event that I went to.
mhm,
Just couldn't believe how somebody who was so strong as a person and successful in their career because they were strong was just, as he talked about this thing, it was,
mhm.
I just, wow, that's really quite something. So he had an impact on me. I got home and I went online and I donated, and now whenever I get the chance, thank you for asking, I try to do my little thing to create awareness. So have a look at the website and do what you can. Yeah.
I'm going to share the website, and also just say that in looking through it, the reason it's called Deborah is that in the 70s, at the time when I was reflecting on my high school years, this mother had a child, Deborah, who was had this from birth, and the doctors sort of said, nothing we can do. You're going to just have
Right.
to take that baby home and wait until she passes. And she just was, I think, yeah, would not accept that. And she started this amazing charity. So listen, it's www.Deborah, spelled Debra, .org.uk, www.deborah.org.uk. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, Dean. And
Thank
I,
you.
I really encourage people to have a look and have a think about how they might be able to support this charity. Okay, Dean, we are back. My favorite part is hearing the true stories from my guests. So, what was a word or an idea or a concept that percolated a story of your own?
I mean, being in this business, there are just, I wish I kept a diary because there are just so many stories. And the one I think from Hong Kong, given your Hong Kong connection and so on, I think that I loved the most was when I started it in Hong Kong and was manager of a restaurant called the Chinnery Bar in the Mandarin, which welcomed male and female guests, but had a history of men only. And there were all kinds of little things that they used to do and or not do. And one of the things you couldn't do was book a table. So it was literally first come, first served, and there were no reservations, and everyone knew there were no reservations. But there are exceptions for certain people, and if palms are greased sufficiently, maybe. So I had a guest coming quite regularly, and then he called me one day and said, "Look, Dean, I'm coming over from the office. Can you just put a newspaper on the table, half a pint of beer, and I'll be there in 5 minutes." So I did that. And by the way, I should preface this by saying I really hadn't been there very long, so I was definitely the new boy. Anyway, shortly afterwards, this other gentleman came in this crisp white shirt and this pinstripe suit. I can picture him right now, immaculate, a banker. And he said, "Oh, can I sit there?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, the gentleman's just gone to the washroom. He'll be back in a moment." And he said, "You're holding tables for people." I said, "No, no, 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 no. It's I'm not." And anyway, he called me out, and
Was
I
your
was,
nose growing while you were saying that?
and clearly I was stuttering and very uncomfortable the more he pushed and so on. So I managed to find him a table, and I sort of was going up to him afterwards to apologize, and he was having none of it. And I said, "Look, here's my card. If ever there's anything," and he said, "Look, I don't want it." Anyway, he came back and days afterwards, and then he came back again and again and again, but early, and got a table and everything. And I was so desperate to get this man's name that I said to the staff, "Look, I need his business card. I need to know who this man is, so that I can go up to him and say, 'Oh, dear Mr. So and so,' and just attempt to recover." Um, and the guys, he always paid cash. He never paid by credit card. They couldn't get his name. And then one day, the waiter came up to me and said, "Oh, table six, credit card, credit card." So I grabbed the credit card to give me the card, and I saw this name. I saw this name, Morgan. So I went back to him. I said, "Oh, Mr. Morgan, so nice to see you again. Thank you so much for coming back." And I was like that character in David Copperfield, where you're sort of rubbing your hands and being extremely sort of Dickensian. And and he looked at me rather sort of oddly. And he sort of said, "Yeah, right, okay." And then the next day he came back and he said, "Oh, Mr. Morgan, welcome back. Your usual." And anyway, this went on and on and on. And he came in with a lady once, and he introduced me to her as his wife. And, "Oh, Mrs. Morgan, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you." And it went on, and I'm not kidding. It was about 6 months, Teresa, of this kind of twice a week kind of thing. And in the end, he called me over one day and he said, "Dean," he said, "I've got to tell you something." He said, "My name is Simon Evans. I work for JP Morgan." That, that expression that expression when you want the ground to open so you can fall through it. I've never wanted it more than ever. I just was mortified. And I had to run away. I just left, and he knew what he'd done,
Well,
and
I'm going to say this, Dean. I think it was beastly of him to let you go on with that for 6 months.
yeah,
That was quite the hair shirt.
yeah. But the thing was that he kept coming back, and actually we became friends. And
Right.
if he's listening to this, I hope he is, because he would be equally amused that I can still recount that sort of 35 years later.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I cannot even believe it, but our time is up. So
Sure.
I'm going to thank you again, Dean Winter, for, all that. Thanks for the memories. I'm going to give another plug to this wonderful charity, www.debra.org.uk. And
Thank you.
listen, if you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment before you sign out on whatever platform you're joining us from today to follow, to like, to comment. It makes a big difference, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm just going to wrap up here by saying breathe all the time and come up slowly. And if you've got a case of the summertime blues, or you feel like throwing in the towel, or you feel like you wish the ground would open up because you've inserted foot in mouth before engaging brain, hang in there, because, what if it's good?